Well, hello, everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Catherine Leonard. I'm the State Historic Preservation Officer here in Arizona. I see a lot of familiar faces and familiar names, both near and far on this call. So thank you so much for joining us today. This is the second of our virtual Preservation in Place webinar events. The concept of preservation in place was hatched out of necessity when SHPO and our partner organization, the Arizona Preservation Foundation, found ourselves in the need to pivot for our annual conference this June amidst the pandemic. And at the time, it was somewhat of a there was bleak global and national news. And we wondered if we could essentially use the virtual platform to take the great dialogues that happen here in Arizona at our statewide conference and open them up to a broader constituency. And the concept was, preservation in place. We're here all in at home, preserving our own place, but it's a time when we can basically reach out and create professional synergy. And it worked. It was a great success. Our virtual conference drew almost 600 attendees from across the United States and a few from abroad to engage in panel discussions with a diverse array of topics, such as the destruction of Native American heritage on the southwest border, an examination of architectural response to disease, and a discussion creating online content for cultural institutions during the pandemic. I am so proud that we could be on the front line of those really important discussions. So in the spirit of the conference's success, we decided to continue the conversation with this webinar series and explore some of the more important issues that are engaging preservationists, not just in Arizona, but across the US. Our first webinar was based out of Tucson, Arizona. We looked at the problem, or I should say the challenge of sustainably programming the Dunbar School, which is a school drawing its significance as one of the last schools to desegregate in Arizona, the subject of many rehabilitation grants and an extensive rehabilitation program that's lasted almost 20 years. But as our panelists in that discussion were able to inform us that essentially rehabilitation is just the first phase of a successful preservation project. Today, we are so proud to host a discussion that examines the issue of diversity and inclusivity within the archaeological profession. It's a topic I'm sure all of you will agree is important and timely. On the note of important and timely, I would be remiss if I didn't remind everyone that our call for sessions is open for our 2021 conference, which will be held June 9th through 11th in Tempe, Arizona, the theme of which is layered landscapes. So in the spirit of true optimism, we're intending to have a brick and mortar conference, but as 2020 has shown us, there may be a need to pivot, and we are certainly prepared to do so. But for those of you who are interested, please check out our conference website linked through the Arizona Preservation Foundation's webpage. Also check out our conference Facebook page and go ahead and submit those sessions. So without further ado, I want to turn over today's discussion to our panel moderator, Mr. Dan Garcia. Those of us in Arizona know Dan well. He is the man who needs no introduction. But for those of us outside of Arizona, I'd like to introduce Dan. He has a bachelor's degree in archaeology from Boston University, a New Yorker at heart, like myself. And he has a master's in anthropology from Northern Arizona University, with more than 20 years of professional experience in private sector cultural resource management. Currently, Dan is serving as Salt River Project's cultural resource manager. He is a dedicated advocate for cultural resource professionals, and I'm not just spinning a yarn here. He is always stand up and ready to go if we ever have an issue at the legislature or any sort of public archaeology issue. He is a dedicated advocate, a founding member of Arizona Heritage Advocates, and he also serves as a member of the City of Phoenix Historic Preservation and Heritage Commissions. So without ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Dan, and I am sitting back and looking forward to a great discussion.
Well, thank you, Madam Officer, and thank you all for attending today's Preservation in Place discussion on diversity and inclusion in Arizona archaeology. This will be a diverse panel discussion with 6 discussants, and I will be moderating the discussion. We have a set list of questions we'll be addressing, and we'll likely not have time to take questions from the audience. I apologize for that, but you're free to use the chat here to ask questions of each other, to comment, and to discuss the session amongst each other, and say hi to your colleagues. So please keep your microphones muted if you can, so that we can focus our attention on the discussants. Remember as you listen today that this may be an uncomfortable conversation. I know it is for me. And I ask that you be willing to experience some discomfort, to respect the points of view and experiences of our discussants and others, and to celebrate diversity of thought in the discussion, and to walk away today willing to see and perhaps do some things differently. Now, let me briefly introduce our discussants. And as I call out the discussants, if you don't mind turning on your camera so people can see you. First up is Margaret Hangen. Margaret is the forest archaeologist at the Kaibab National Forest in northern Arizona. Margaret has a bachelor's degree from Pitzer College in Claremont, California, and a master's degree from California State University, Bakersfield. She was a shovel bum in the Great Basin in California for 10 years before being hired in 1998 as a student intern at the Bureau of Land Management in California. In 2003, Margaret transferred to the Cleveland National Forest in San Diego, where she managed the Heritage and Tribal Relations Program, and in 2007 moved to the Kaibab National Forest. So welcome, Margaret. Next up is Dr. William White. Dr. White is an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of California, Berkeley, where he specializes in historical archaeology of the African diaspora, historic preservation, and community-based research. He earned his PhD at the University of Arizona, where he worked for the Bureau of Applied Research in Anthropology as an anthropological archaeologist. His master's in anthropology is from the University of Idaho. Dr. White also worked as a cultural resource management archaeologist in Arizona and throughout the American West. He connects with broader audiences, featuring his archaeological work on blogs, videos, podcasts, and other publications. We're very lucky to have Dr. White with us today. Next up is April Siwakwaptiwa, is a historic preservation team planner for the Arizona Department of Transportation. She has a bachelor's degree in history from Northern Arizona University. April is an enrolled member of the Hopi tribe from the village of Sichomavi, and she is a member of the Butterfly Clan. Next is Jewel Tutchin, is a senior archaeologist at Logan Simpson, whose main headquarters is in Tempe, Arizona. Logan Simpson is an environmental planning, community planning, landscape architecture, and cultural resources firm that has been in business for 30 years. Jewel's archaeological career spans 26 years and includes employment with 2 Arizona tribal communities and 2 large engineering firms. Jewel is a member of the Navajo Nation and is originally from the small community called St. Michael's. Her clans include Towering House, Many Goats, Bitter Water, and Deer Springs people. Rebecca Renteria is an archaeologist based out of Southern Arizona. She received her bachelor's and master's degree in anthropology and archaeology from the University of Arizona and currently works as an archaeologist at the Laboratory of Tree Ring Research at the University of Arizona. Her area of interest is in community-based archaeology with a focus on foodways and public health. And last, Annie J. Lutz is an archaeologist and architectural historian who serves as a cultural resource team leader for SWCA Environmental Consultants in Flagstaff, Arizona. With nearly 16 years of experience in the Southwest, she received her bachelor's in classical archaeology from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, her master's in Near Eastern Studies from the University of Arizona, and a master's from Northern Arizona University researching wildfire impacts to cultural resources. A member of the LGBTQ+ community, Annie recognizes that with her career as a white archaeologist, she has an active role in perpetuating the colonial narrative in Arizona archaeology and looks forward to participating in the solution rather than continuing to be part of the problem. Thank you all, guests, for being here today. And I got a few things to say before we begin today's discussions. First, I would like to acknowledge that the lands we occupy today are native lands. And I honor those people who have stewarded these places since time immemorial and their families who continue to remind us that living in a place creates responsibilities to the land, the water, air, animals, and the people of that place. I recognize your connection to these lands and waters are timeless, and I acknowledge the many tribes, clans, families, and people that have made and continue to make this place we call Arizona home. Thank you. All right, next is a little bit of audience participation. So Heather, are you on? Great, Heather is on, and she's going to go ahead and share her screen with us. Hang on a second, I got to deal with the multiple window business going on here. Many thanks to Heather for being here. And Heather Moffett is from SWCA Environmental Consultants, and I'd like to thank her and SWCA for graciously donating Heather's time and the use of the Mentimeter application subscription for this discussion. Thank you. So audience, looks like you're already catching on here, but from your phone, iPad, or computer browser, go to menti.com, enter that passcode you see at the top of the screen, and we've got about 5 questions about your thoughts on diversity in Arizona archaeology. And we have a lot to cover today, so we're going to go through these pretty quickly. So don't worry, we'll revisit the results at the end of the discussion here. I'll give everybody a moment or a few to answer the question before we move on to the next one. So the first question, if you're not able to see the screen right now, is in field settings, how often do you work with non-white personnel? And it looks like we're getting a lot of answers that are rarely, and sometimes with less frequently, a few always, and no never responses. All right, so it looks like we've had about 35 people participate, and let's see, give it another moment, and then let's move on to the next question. All right, Heather, let's move on to the next question then. Okay, second question is in non-field settings. So this is in the laboratory, in the office, in the classroom. How often do you work with non-white personnel? So go ahead and put in those answers as well. So seeing a pretty similar pattern to the first questions, that in non-field settings, folks are rarely and sometimes sharing field settings with non-white personnel, but generally there's a few more frequently in here, and a few nevers as well. Okay, looks like we've got a good amount here. Let's move on to the next question. Do you feel that Arizona archaeology community is diverse? A yes, no question should be pretty easy. Thank you. It's a pretty stunning number there. So it looks like a lot of the group thinks Arizona archaeology community is not very diverse, but yet there are some responses that think it is. Okay. All right, Heather, let's advance to the next question. Thank you. Do you feel that Arizona archaeology benefits marginalized or underrepresented communities? So we have a few yes answers that archaeology benefits marginalized and underrepresented communities, and a lot of no answers. Okay, thank you. And do we have one more question, Heather? Will that be question 5, I think?
Yes, one more.
Great, thank you, Heather. Let's go ahead and move on to that. Here's the last question, and don't worry, we'll come back to these at the end of the session. Do you think that Arizona archaeology is objective and unbiased? Got a lot of good responses here. So I have a lot of folks saying Arizona archaeology is not necessarily objective or unbiased, and then some folks who are weighing in and saying there is objectivity and neutrality in Arizona archaeology. Very good. All right. Well, thank you, Heather. I think that's pretty good here, and I appreciate that. Again, folks, we'll go ahead and revisit that the way everybody answered and at the end of the session here so that you can see what the results were, okay? All right. So the State Historic Preservation Office and Arizona Archaeological Council recently conducted a demographic survey of Arizona's archaeologists. Hopefully, many of you got the link and participated in that poll. And the poll was inspired by a lecture hosted by Dr. White, who's with us today, back in September, titled Archaeological Pedagogy in the Era of Black Lives Matter. That lecture is available on YouTube, and Erin's going to go ahead and post the link in the chat for you if that's something you'd like to watch. I highly recommend it. You could also Google the words archaeological pedagogy, and it shows up pretty high in the list, so you should be able to find that pretty easy. And I want to thank Catherine Schinzel from Arizona State Parks, who prepared the SurveyMonkey poll and for providing the results to us. So as of this morning, we had a little over 200 people respond, which by my very rough estimation is about 1/4 to 1/3 of Arizona's archaeologists. Now, this isn't necessarily reflective of the whole community, but it's a pretty good measure of diversity among Arizona's professional archaeologists. And I want to just talk about a few of the results very quickly with you before we start our discussion. More than 90% of the respondents in the survey identify as white, which is more or less consistent with national demographics. About 8% identify as Native American, about 6% identify as Hispanic or Latinx, and less than 1% of respondents identify as Black, which is less than the national demographic. In terms of age, about 40% of respondents were more than 55 years old, which was a little surprising to me. 45 to 54-year-olds make up about 23% of the workforce, with 36% less than 45 years in age. Only 16% of the respondents are recent entrants into the field and less than 34 years old, signaling a potential shortage of incoming archaeologists into Arizona. 90% of respondents have a bachelor's degree consistent with national data. 75% have a master's degree, which is actually quite a bit higher than the national trend. 30% have a doctoral degree, and less than 10% of the respondents have no academic degree at all. I'm almost done with the statistics, sorry. 15% of respondents are in academic or museum employment, and nationally the trend is about 90% of academics are white. We don't have that statistic for the state just yet. We're working on crunching those numbers a little bit better. 22% of the workforce in Arizona works for government agencies, about 5% work in tribal programs, and a whopping 50% of the respondents work in the approximately $25 million private sector cultural resource management industry in Arizona. The reason I mentioned these demographic statistics is to point out that a majority of Arizona archaeologists are white, and a relatively small number of white academics have a disproportionate influence on 70% of the government and private sector archaeology workforce, a workforce which, by the way, averages over 50 years in age, with less people entering the field every year. There's an idea that archaeology and most other things are based in the idea that whiteness is the normal American identity and that everything else is not normal. For 90% of folks, this is a very difficult process. It's something hard to talk about and hard to accept. And we need more archaeologists to enter the field. And it's time for more people of color to be in Arizona archaeology. Academia and the CRM industry need to overcome white privilege, fragility, and discomfort and start to recruit, sponsor, and mentor more archaeologists of color. Okay, now enough of hearing from me. You're here to listen to our discussants today. So discussants, if you'd make sure you have your cameras on, and hello, and we're gonna start with our first discussion question. And that is, a common critique of Arizona archaeology is that the profession has a bias favoring colonialist perspectives on ancient history and tends to attribute much of the post-1850 archaeological record to white Euro-Americans. How can we improve archaeological practice to include more Native perspectives on ancient history? And how can we attribute more of the historic era archaeology to the Native, Black, and Hispanic, Chicano, and Latinx populations that also inhabited Arizona. To start off, this could be free flow, but Margaret, would you like to address the question first? Margaret, we cannot hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, I've been so good about that all day, but obviously it's late afternoon. Yeah, I do want to address this, and some of the things I've experienced in this field is we have a tendency, especially when it comes to historic period stuff, we have a tendency to focus it on the essentially the European narrative. And the problem with this, and on one hand, from a research standpoint or from a cultural resources standpoint, I understand people are trying to distinguish the prehistory tribal Native American perspective versus the historic. And we have a tendency to put that after the Spanish show up to the continent, and then i.e. the Spanish are Europeans, therefore everything after that is European. Well, first off, when the Spanish showed up, they brought Africa with them. They brought Africans with them. Africa landed on this continent at the same time the Spanish did. But the use of it, that's an aside. The point is the use of putting our perspective into a Euroamerican perspective. What we're doing is we're glossing over the fact that a good chunk of our history is diverse, and there's a variety of different cultures who bring and are part of this narrative. In recent years, I've been doing a lot of discussion or a lot of research around the African-American history of Northern Arizona. A lot of people aren't even aware of the fact that there are African-American people, or were African-American people in Northern Arizona, much less that the African-Americans contributed to Northern American history. And in fact, it's very long, and there's a strong amount of contributing. Our language around discussing the history of Arizona doesn't acknowledge the fact that there is a variety of different cultural diversity in relationship to the history of Arizona. And I don't think it's intentional, but by the language we use, it's erasing the fact that there are these other stories out there. So that's one of, I'm sure, many other examples there are where our approach to discussing the archaeology and the cultural development of Arizona, of this region, is not inclusive in how we approach it.
Thank you, Margaret. Jewel, would you like to follow up with discussing how we can improve archaeological practice to include more Native perspectives?
Sure. Well, whenever I consider problem solving on a large scale, I often think education is the way to start making change happen. So for this situation, I think we can initially address this concern by looking down educational avenues. So within Arizona, we're lucky we have a very supportive SHPO who is receptive to working with tribes and underrepresented communities. And perhaps through their office, we can work to develop more of the historic context studies or thematic studies about topics regarding Arizona history that remain untold or are less known. I think one way that archaeologists can possibly push this to fruition is by pressuring Arizona legislators for additional funding for such studies. And I'm fairly certain that the SHPO is willing to work with the tribes and other communities if all those parties are in agreement and interested in developing more of those studies. Another means to improve and maybe include voices, maybe to offer the tribes and underrepresented people an opportunity to develop their internal websites if they have them, to tell their own stories, and potentially making it a requirement for archaeologists to reference those websites for additional information during their background research process. So archaeologists, I think should feel a responsibility to learn about the communities in which they work. And if they don't, assisting tribes to develop those websites and requiring archaeologists to reference those websites may be a good way to educate archaeologists about tribal viewpoints and the diversity of viewpoints that are out there. And that gives control to the tribes to say what they want about the cultural resources that are important to them. But I think a more direct and sweeping approach to improve archaeological practice may be to begin to work more and more with teachers in academia. I think it's incumbent for archaeologists to share their knowledge more with the general public, what they learn from doing archaeology, especially data recovery, I think should be shared with the communities in which that work takes place. And in sharing that information, that provides the communities an opportunity to give feedback and input and breathe more life into the documents that are being produced, and uh, provide more perspective also, and affirm that the research results are actually true. But the point is, once archaeologists share their understandings, I think people will learn and carry that knowledge with them into the future. Currently, the schools hardly ever talk about Native American history. And I think in all my years of schooling, I think I only learned about Native Americans during one semester in college. And I went to school on an Indian reservation. So, education about Native Americans can be drastically expanded. People should know, for example, that there are 574 federally recognized tribes in the US. They should know what the term federally recognized means. They should know that Columbus did not discover America, et cetera, et cetera. The fact that they don't highlights an absence of that knowledge in schools. And that's where archaeologists can help. They can organize, just as off the top of my head, they can organize, for instance, a conference that pulls teachers and archaeologists under the same roof to begin to share information and to develop lesson plans that students at all levels of education can tap into, and they can, gain a really good understanding of Arizona history that way. The future archaeologists, the ones that are still in grade school, high school, and even college, can, I think, really benefit from that collaboration between teachers and archaeologists.
Jewel, what some fantastic ideas you have there. Thank you so much. I was hoping maybe we could ask Dr. White to weigh in since we're talking about education. And Dr. White, would you like to weigh in at this point?
Of course, I'd go next after that excellent response. Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Jewel and Margaret brought up. One of the parts of this question, though, that I think about most closely is the kind of decolonizing aspect, work that's been going on for over a decade now here. One of the things I think of is Chip Caldwell Chanthapone and TJ Ferguson and other folks' work that was talking about decolonizing archaeology and the promise of Indigenous archaeology to play a central role, because the thing that we're talking about is understanding that there's some communities that have been marginalized historically and continue to be marginalized by our social structures. And so when you're talking about decolonization when it comes to archaeology, you're really looking at your commitment to ensure that other groups are given a chance to add to their own history, but also to add to the history that we all share as, U.S. citizens. And so, as a Black archaeologist, this means creating space so that archaeology can tackle these narratives, but create the space that, non-white communities are contributing to that, not being pushed to the side, but actually an integral part of the entire research program. And so, that's going to involve things that Jewel was just mentioning, adding those narratives to the historical context in the state of Arizona. But it also means, addressing the inequality in archaeology, that, we need to really increase diversity and amplify the voice of non-white people as sovereign contributors to their own cultural knowledge, right? So we can use archaeology to address some of this stuff, by providing an example of a pathway for folks to get education. In my own work, I focus mainly on getting students to go to college and finish college. And if some of them become archaeologists, that's great. But really, it's about, you know, providing a place for Black students to work with other Black scholars to see an example of that they can go further. And if they go into archaeology, that's great. But, you know, to give them that kind of experience of being with other scholars, to apply to graduate school, to know that they are making a difference by finishing college. I mean, that's definitely part of our, you know, obligation as archaeologists and scholars, but just our moral obligation to, you know, help people in these affected communities. But the other thing that I go back to is the recent article I read earlier this summer by Sim Schneider and Catherine Hayes about the reality that it may not be possible as practice to decolonize archaeology. You know, we're going to have to expand it into something that's more akin to heritage conservation if we're going to include these things and make archaeology an asset that matters to non-white communities, Indigenous communities, because, you know, the way that it's going, it's not necessarily integrating archaeological knowledge into local cultural practices. So, you know, that's going to involve, you know, not focusing on the archaeological data as the all, you know, version of data. When we think about, you know, these cultural resources programs, the archaeologists are really empowered to say whether something is significant or is not, and to describe that thing, because, you know, we have the degrees and we have the kind of mandate through our position to be making those kind of decisions. And so in that way, it really places empirical archaeology and processual archaeology knowledge production over things that folks have known for generations in their local neighborhoods and on their tribal lands. So decolonizing archaeology is going to mean rethinking the way we produce knowledge, that it's not just from these archaeological surveys or excavations or measurements or artifact classification, that it's really kind of a syncretic interpretation of what it means for the people who actually created those sites and what it means for archaeologists, into something that really makes a more holistic statement to historic preservation, and that it definitely recognizes that there's more than one way to know the past, and that archaeological information is just one way we can look at these things.
Thank you, Dr. White. Rebecca, I'd like to hear from you at this point. As a Chicana in archaeology, what are your thoughts?
Hi, yeah, I first want to thank everyone for being here today. And also, I generally identify as Mexican American, so there's a lot of nuance there. And I also just want to say that I speak from my own experience. And so everything I say is sort of like my own. And so I think a lot about archaeology and academia, because that's primarily the space that I've been in. And touching on what both Jewel and Bill have said, so many of the folks who now work in archaeology have to go through an institution in order to have a degree to even do this work. And so I think a huge step in working towards bringing diversity and equity to the field is to really look at what is going on in academia. And so that means, for me, the key word has always been equity. There are folks from certain backgrounds who need more support in order to get to places where we have not had representation. And I think an example of the importance of having more diverse voices in this field is we have the ability to talk about the nuances of identity, for instance, in which people often talk about in archaeology. And, you know, I think about the word Latino or Hispanic as it's been mentioned already, but these terms might just be taken at face value for people who do not have to think about identity on a daily basis. This is literally what we do all the time. And so when we use words like those, these are words that tend to strip and erase identities of our Indigenous people. And so when we are in this field, and because these things go through our minds on a daily basis, in a way that they don't go through other people's minds, we have the ability to better understand the histories of these areas and people that we've had relations with in the past and continue to have relations with. And so I think that's just more of a direct example of the importance of diversity, is when you have people from more diverse backgrounds, we know what's going on, and we want the ability to have a voice in those narratives, because when archaeology is just done for the sake of doing archaeology, whether it's survey or some sort of novel research question, oftentimes a lot of these questions are not directly affecting or impacting in a positive way communities. And so I think that as archaeologists, we have a responsibility to uplift the communities in which we work. And yeah, so that's kind of, for me, understanding archaeology and how, what people can do to help improve or diversify the field is to really think about it in terms of equity, to really focus and understand that that archaeology does not exist inside of a bubble in the same sense that many other disciplines do not have diversity. It's the same exact thing in archaeology. And yeah, so that's kind of, those are my thoughts. And I also think about, the ideas of decolonizing archaeology as well. And that's like, it's a tricky term in that it kind of implies that something can be reverted entirely back to the way it was. And with the processes that our communities have undergone, is that entirely possible? What are other ways that we can also think about it? I've mostly in like food, in talking about food, in these communities, there's an idea of re-indigenizing. So rather than centering it on colonization, it's centering on something else that, does not center on colonization, but rather centers on the community now as it exists. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. April, I imagine a lot of what Rebecca said resonated with you. Would you like to talk, please?
Yeah, I can actually make this pretty quick because I think everybody already covered everything I was already going to talk about. But I think from my own perspective, just, I guess, hiring more people that look like myself, that are out in the field and not necessarily, they don't even really need to have degrees. I think I've only been in the field one time where there was tribal members that were hired on, and the amount of information that they were able to give without having that degree, but just having the experience of looking at these artifacts and stuff. I think just, and also having other people who look like you, it gives you encouragement to want to maybe go back to school for this. And there is a need to be able to support people like that. So we have to be willing to encourage them to go on to school. But that also, like Joel mentioned, it begins way at the beginning. So we kind of just have to keep working to encouraging people to get into this field, because it is a little intimidating when there's no one else that looks like you in this field. So it was really hard to kind of get used to that. But I think we just need to get more people, more diverse people within the field.
Dan, you're muted.
Of course I am. Sorry about that. So I'd like to hear from Annie if we can. So we've heard from our BIPOC participants, but as a non-BIPOC person, Annie, what are your thoughts here?
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, so I think first off, I think just the variety of responses that we've seen already shows you that this is a systemic issue. It's not just any one thing. And it's really, as a white archaeologist, I'm trained in a white paradigm. My field directors, my crew members have been predominantly white. My professors were white. So, you know, we pass on what we learn. And so I just, you know, listening to what everyone else had to say and how different each one of us have, you know, the different types of things we've tackled. It just shows you that it's a system. Our system's broken. And in a way, the only way to move forward is to start to deconstruct the system, and not put any more Band-Aids on it. But I guess my short little piece is going to be, you know, I picture in the field, in terms of, you know, where does archaeology start? But, you know, let's say it starts in the field. And in terms of the types of sites that we're looking at, I really think that we need to let go of this idea that we need proof that something is not white. It's, you know, I mean, it's we need to let go of this needing to prove cultural affiliation, temporal affiliation, that this is not white. Because then when we don't have any of those indicators, particularly with the historic era, as we call it, site, we say Euroamerican, which in and of itself is a problematic term. And we need to address our vocabulary, like Margaret was saying, that we need to start with our language. But for me, we just need to move past having to have proof that it is not white in the field. So, but I agree with what everyone else has said in little, you know, bits. As it came down to me, I was like, okay, no, what am I going to talk about that's different? But that really resonated with me, is that in terms of our interpretation in the field as a white archaeologist, because I bet that is, you know, that's ingrained in me, that I need proof that this is Apache. I don't see anything that tells me it's Apache. I don't see anything that tells me this is Yavapai. And we need to move past that, you know, because I have plenty of people who have told me that the Yavapai have been here, the Apache have been here, the Hopi have been here, the Navajo have been there. And I should be able to say that, you know, without having to cite or have an academic reference. So that's kind of my 2 cents on it.
Thank you, Annie. I promised I wouldn't go off on a rampage about the term Euro-American, so thanks for not giving me an in there. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next discussion topic, and this is for our BIPOC participants, so for April, Margaret, Rebecca, Jewel, and Bill. As people of color, you all experienced and continue to hit obstacles on the path towards being a professional archaeologist. What hurdles did you experience? What hurdles do you still experience? And how can Arizona Archaeology lessen the barriers to entry for BIPOC archaeologists? What advice do you have for new BIPOC archaeologists? And I'm going to start off with April first, because April and I have known each other for a very long time, and I think I've been there at a few moments in April's life where she's been through these hurdles. So April, would you start, please?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest hurdles that I had was is that I was I'm a mother, and I had young kids when I first started, and this is a field that is not family friendly, and so, you know, trying to find a babysitter for your kid at 4 o'clock in the morning so that you can be in the field by 5 o'clock, that was very hard. And thankfully my mother was able to help me. But the other I guess hurdle that I've also experienced is that I have a bachelor's degree. I've purposely chosen not to get a master's degree, but I've kind of kept working. I kept working my way up into the field that I've eventually ended up in, which is in state government. But I feel like I did my time, you know, shovel bumming and doing all of that. But I was the only Native archaeologist. I only met Jewel until maybe like a year ago when we first were going to do a panel for the SHPO conference this year. So I had heard about her, but we've never actually worked together. And it was very hard to find other Native archaeologists because the only Natives that I ever had any contact with, they were going to be they were going to be TIPOs, or they were going to be some sort of I guess they were going to be offering some type of, tribal support, but there was no actual in-field archaeologists. And so I know that whenever I have been in the field, that my presence alone has created other field archaeologists react differently around me. They don't say certain things around me. And but at the same time, they were always coming to me, like, oh, what does this mean? As if I'm going to know exactly what a design on a piece of ceramic is going to be. And that was kind of something that, again, I never wanted to do that. I never wanted to go into a specialization like ceramics or flint knapping or anything like that. I just wanted to be an archaeologist. And that was really hard because it was just everybody else kind of, in a sense, were coming up with these specialties and, diving into what they wanted to do. And I just wanted to just work. And so, but I knew I wanted to, once I got into state agency work, that's where I kind of really started to feel like I can finally have a difference. I can finally have a say. So this is where I feel like I'm actually going to do something, because before I was never given those chances. So, and if I were to give any advice, it would be to just, I'm more than willing to help anybody if they want to go to school for this. We can find you money. It's, if you need any kind of support, if you need a place to stay, there's a lot of things that I can do, but I'm willing to do it. But I think we don't have the support that I guess other people would, because a lot of people who look like me, they're going to be coming from reservations. They don't have a home down here. They can't get to work because they don't have a vehicle to, and so it's just, there's just a lot of factors that kind of go into being an archaeologist. And we have such a rich history here that I think there just needs to be a lot more people that are like myself in the field, because again, it does change reactions and feelings in the field. If there is someone whose history that you're, in a sense, digging up, it's yes, it's a cool job. It's a really, really cool job, but this is also someone's life. So, and you're having a, when you're going to write it up in a report, you're changing someone's history. So.
Thank you, April. Appreciate that. Maybe we could turn it over to Dr. White. You've got a perspective. You've worked here in Arizona, but you've worked elsewhere. What's your perspective, and what were the hurdles that you were have encountered, and what you continue to go through?
Yeah, thanks for giving me a chance to respond. Well, I mean, first of all, I'm on the tenure track, so there's no way I'm going to be recorded talking about my hurdles right now. Let there be no evidence, my friends. But anyway, I will talk about just the overall, hurdles that I've faced. But first, I'd like to start with the things that I always give people recommendations, regardless of who it is. If they want to get into archaeology, I just tell them that they have to learn how to write, and they need to learn it really well. You need to be able to write on command all the time, in every circumstance, every situation, with every app and all your texts and every email. Know how to write, know the rules, the regulations. You got to know those. So that's kind of the standard stuff. You got to know why you're doing what you're doing. And then choose something that you really like and learn everything you can about it, because that a lot of times is going to be the motivation to keep you going through all those dozens of projects that you don't really care that much about what's going on, and they're under difficult situations. If you really are into something, whatever you choose, go to the limit of your knowledge on that thing. But, going on to, what I tell students of color when they say that they want to go into archaeology, it mirrors a lot of what April was just mentioning. You are going to be alone. That poll, the informal poll that we took for this workshop, that already tells you what's going on. You're not really going to have anyone that you can talk to, not in the faculty, not anywhere else. And then a lot of times, you're going to find yourself kind of alone in your own family, because there's a lot of pressure for you not to do something like archaeology. If you're one of the people of color that's fortunate enough to go to college and you've passed all the tests and everything to get into school, there's going to be a lot of people in your family that are going to say, archaeology, are you kidding me? Like, go into almost anything else, law, medicine. Those are the two instant robotic choices, but also business or this or that, something where you can get a job to make a lot of money. So I think you're not always going to find support even at your own house. So, the solo status is going to be real. You having to represent everything of your entire culture, your entire race, to every archaeologist who's going to continually ask you questions, like April was just saying. Imposter syndrome is also going to be real, because people will doubt you. They're so used to seeing white archaeologists. They're not used to seeing anyone with color knowing what they're talking about when it comes to archaeology. So they'll doubt you to the point where you actually think that maybe you, in fact, don't know stuff. So if you made it to the point where you're an archaeologist, you finished school, you got the degree, you got the same experience, if not even more than the people that you're talking to. So don't doubt yourself. You made it. You're here now. Like, this is your table too. It's not just theirs. So definitely, you're not an imposter and you belong, for sure. That's something I tell students of color. Another thing that I don't know if there's a word, I don't know if this is even actually a real word, but it was something I was telling Black students I work with, but then I found out there's a new show called Hentified, and it a lot of ways kind of talks about what happens when you leave your neighborhood and your family and everyone, and then you go and learn something like anthropology, and then you come back, right? You have a different approach. You're still from the same neighborhood. This is still your family and everything, but you've got a new way of seeing your own neighborhood and society and everything. A lot of times it does not jive with what your people back home think of the world. So then you end up in a kind of liminal state because of that too, because you have a different approach to life and understanding society that doesn't, it's not as straightforward or black and white or, as cut and dry as what a lot of people in your own neighborhood know. So you're going to be coming back into this space, and, it's how you handle yourself is up to you, right? Code switching is definitely a thing. You switch back, then you switch back when it's time to be an archaeologist. You switch when it's time to be with your family and friends and stuff. It's not to rock the boat. Or maybe you just keep your same identity, and you just carry it forward. So, those three things there that, you're going to be alone. They may doubt you to the point where you doubt yourself, and that you're going to be changed by becoming an archaeologist. You're not going to fit back in a lot of times when you get back. Those are things I tell students of color. But going on to the hurdles, a lot of that stuff, that advice comes from stuff I experienced, to being the only one, right? The only person of color, the only one that every single time there's any kind of diversity or anything else, you're always the one at your company that's the one. Automatically, it's assumed you always will be on every single non-white project. You will always be the one that's doing all the diversity, everything, and somehow telling everyone else in the field, how to handle themselves, right? So that's always going to be your lot until we have more diversity. And the other thing too, that Arizona is unique. You're right. I have worked in several other states, but it's very insular, and it is not easy if you're not from the state of Arizona to get a job in Arizona doing archaeology. The state universities are well known. They are excellent at helping train archaeologists, and companies are not very willing to hire folks from outside of the state. I got my start in Arizona because I'd done historical archaeology for so many years, and it was on a project where there was a lot of artifacts that were from the time period that I had already worked on similar projects elsewhere in the American West. It wasn't because of my depth of knowledge of ancestral Arizona Native American cultures. It was because I knew historical archaeology and was willing to do that kind of work with all the stuff that other people didn't think was interesting. But in my time there, as someone who helped look at resumes and CVs, you know, there was kind of a pile of people who came from Arizona that were from Arizona and went to an Arizona university, and a pile of others. And if we couldn't find enough people from the Arizona stack, then we turned to the other stack to fill out the crew. And so, you know, that is a challenge that's unique to just Arizona. And it's not necessarily rooted in ethnicity or race. It's just rooted in the fact that Arizona Archaeology recruits from within and promotes from within. And so then, you know, on the flip side, if we're going to increase diversity in Arizona, I recommend that, you know, Arizona folks look at the diversity they already have and expand on what they've already got. So the survey shows we have Hispanic and Native folks who are doing archaeology in the state of Arizona. If you're not going to hire from outside of the state, start with what you've already got and expand what you already have. And I also feel like there's a reality to that. There's a reason why they don't want to hire, because Arizona is not an easy place to work.
Thank you, Dr. White. We're running just a hair behind schedule, so I'm going to ask if anybody else wants to chime in on this discussion item. Please go ahead and pipe in. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question.
Hey, Dan, I'd like to say a few words here.
Please.
The hurdles for me were a lot. There were many. For me, it began close to home. Navajo people, Navajo culture, you know, they have strong beliefs about death, and we're actually encouraged to stay away from archaeological sites. So my decision to become an archaeologist was one that I had to run past my family. And fortunately, they were very supportive and are so to this day. We've had many discussions about my work, and we continue to do so. And I think they find what I do very interesting. But another hurdle that I encountered is one that I read about for the most part. It's almost like a self-imposed doubt about choosing archaeology as a career. Through the years, you know, I've read a lot of books, and there are a lot of well-known Native American authors and American civil rights proponents that oppose archaeological practices. They call it grave looting, oppressive, sacrilegious, you know, all those different names. And I understand those points of view, but thinking through that was also a hurdle in and of itself. The only advice I have for folks who find themselves in the same situation where cultural beliefs enter the picture is just to listen to your inner voice, kind of like what Dr. White was saying. Just listen to your heart. If you have that strong desire to pursue this career, I think you can do it. I figure there has to be a reason for that interest. I was interested to the point where I couldn't ignore it. So, you know, I went ahead and pursued my interest. I was, you know, this hurdle is a very personal one. And I'm not sure archaeology in general or as a practice can lessen the barrier outside of providing some mentorships and internships so that tribal folks that are interested in archaeology can begin to see what it entails. I know archaeology isn't just about excavation. There is a lot more involved. You know, there is a business side of it, and that part might be of interest to some folks. Another hurdle that I encountered was the educational and financial one. There is a huge culture shock for many Native American students when they enter college. And on top of that, you know, there are a set of stressors particular to the students interested in archaeology. So like April said, in order to have a viable career, archaeologists need a bachelor's and master's degree, and they are encouraged to attend field schools. Field schools are expensive. A college education is expensive. A couple of ways I think these burdens can be lessened is by providing archaeological mentors in college for Native students, and by providing substantial financial assistance for Native students interested in archaeology or anthropology or any of those related fields. And I also encourage, you know, archaeological organizations like the AAC to invite and strongly recruit Native American participation. And I encourage consulting firms to establish internships for students interested in archaeology so they can get a taste of what, you know, the career entails. But in general, I think we can begin to recruit more people of color by offering better pay across the board. Out of all the sciences, I think archaeology may be one of the fields that's paid the least. As a discipline, we need to work together to increase salaries for archaeologists. That may in turn, I think, entice more participation from underrepresented groups. I think those groups are looking for education as a way out of poverty. And I remember when I was entering college, I was an engineering major because I felt some, again, self-imposed pressure to help my family financially. And I was the first one in my immediate family to graduate from college, so I felt extra expectations to do well career-wise. And those kind of pressures could be alleviated, I think, if archaeologists were well paid or paid better.
Thank you so much, Jewel. And I did definitely hear the AAC request there to recruit more natives, and that is definitely something I have talked about in the past, and will be on the agenda next year. Absolutely. So we are running out of time. Rebecca, I know you have your microphone off because you have something to say. So this is a good topic. Why don't you go ahead and step in briefly?
Yeah, so just briefly, I mean, agreeing with what everyone is saying about, you know, a lot of these hurdles having to do with expectations from family, your own culture, you know, your communities in general, I mean, really impacts the way we think about going to school. And so I think, yeah, re-envisioning what it means to be an archaeology and anthropology student, and having those in academia recognize that this is necessary. And, you know, I think especially for grad schools, you know, folks who want to continue on past getting a bachelor's degree, I think it's really difficult. I've heard, you know, and I've been told multiple times too, that it's really difficult to get into a graduate program if you come from an institution where you got your bachelor's degree. And so for a lot of us, in the places that we call home, in the places where we have our histories, because of that, because of financial reasons, we don't go other places. We stay with our families. We stay in the towns where we're from. And so I think I urge folks to kind of recognize that by not having our voices in the narrative by means of the idea that we will not be admitted if we came from this home institution, that our voices are actively being silenced by not admitting us into programs, or, you know, we can still apply to them, but it's still like this sort of added layer of being able to access something, and not just access something, but to be an active voice in the narrative. So that's just, yeah, briefly.
Thanks, Rebecca. And you know, I think in retrospect, we probably should have scheduled a 3-hour session here, because this is a really good conversation. We're never going to get it all through, so I apologize to everyone for that. We're going to move on to the next question now, and I'm going to ask this question directly of April and Margaret. If anybody else does want to chime in, just go ahead and unmute your mic so that I can see that you want to talk, and we'll go that way. So the next question is, archaeology is one way of knowing and teaching the past, but traditional knowledge and stories are the way many natives learn from their elders about their history. Should archaeology and traditional knowledge be considered equally? And April, will you address that one first?
Yeah, and I think Annie had mentioned it earlier when she said, you know, that not everything should have to come with a reference or a citation of some sort. And I think this kind of falls into that because I come from a culture that is very oral based, oral history based. But at the same time, you know, I think we don't necessarily want all of that information out for everybody to know. You know, like it's as if, you know, we're holding all of these secrets, and, you know, we have, you know, people coming in and wanting us to share this information, which, you know, isn't necessarily meant for everybody. There's a lot of stuff that I don't even know because I'm not part of certain societies or within certain groups that are already within my tribe. So, but at the same time, we should be able to find a way that that information can be passed on, and a way that it can be shared without taking away from the tribe itself. And it's, but I think it's, you know, right now the way that it's being done, it's, you know, being done by ethnographic research and being published in these books and stuff that are kind of in a sense separate from, you know, public or not even public, because reports aren't necessarily public knowledge. But, you know, I guess to kind of start treating cultural knowledge as not this, you know, super secret thingy, and just know that when you're talking to someone, you know, that you might just have to listen, and they may not want you to write every single thing down. So they may tell you this information, but, you know, maybe give them a draft of what you're going to write and let them have a chance to be able to take out some certain information. Because again, there's a lot of things that, you know, especially for my tribe, that we're not going to want out there for everybody to view, especially with this, a lot of a cultural appropriation that's going on. That's a huge thing for us. And, you know, we are, in a sense, the tribe is also their own worst enemy right now as well. But, you know, there are ways for us to be able to, the tribe should have a way to be able to control that information and how it is sent out and interpreted, I should say.
Thank you, April. Margaret, in your role at the Kaibab National Forest and as the tribal program manager for a time for the Southwest region, what are your perspectives here?
Well, I don't do the tribal, I'm actually the forest archaeologist, but I completely agree with April in that we do have a responsibility to incorporate or at least allow for other perspectives when we're looking at, especially from a management standpoint, when we're managing these resources that frankly are not ours. We do need to go out and seek input on how to manage these resources in a way that's culturally significant or culturally important. And we do have a responsibility to do that. Now, it's very difficult to do that in the Section 106 game, because that's very processual. It has very specific things that have to be met to meet your legal requirements. But that still doesn't mean that you cannot get at it in other ways. And through developing management plans, a good example is the Kaibab's forest plan. We worked very closely with our tribal partners to put in our forest plan stipulations and recommendations, and that would help us to better manage our traditional cultural places, for instance, in a way that we made sure that tribal people had an opportunity to input them and make recommendations so that we could be more effective in how we approach to managing these places. So, you know, there are a variety of ways that you can get at this, and but you have to be thinking ahead, and you have to be creative, and you have to also recognize the value of this input, and the fact that your tribal partners have been managing this landscape long before our federal lands were created. So they have their perspective on how this landscape should be managed. And we as land managers need to go out and seek that perspective around how to manage these lands and these resources, and try to incorporate it and make it a part of your legal approach. So, and that's not only for tribal, but let me add in, as a person of color, that's for communities of color as well. If you're doing work in a Black community, if you're doing work in a Hispanic community, you're looking at sites that are associated with people of color, you have a responsibility to talk to those communities, to incorporate their perspectives, to ask them about some of the things that you're finding, and ask them about what knowledge that they have, and incorporate that into into what and how you're interpreting what you are doing in your work. You know, granted, some of these sites may be, you know, quite old, but modern people have modern perspectives on these, and just because they're, you know, this may be related to their great grandparents or older, doesn't mean that their current modern day perspectives shouldn't be taken into consideration in relationship to these places. So yeah, bringing in people and people's perspectives as part of management of these places or interpretation of these places, I think is really important, and we need to take the time to do so.
Thank you, Margaret. We are, like I said, running a little bit behind here. So what I'd like to do is skip ahead to our last question. And if there's anything anybody wanted to say as part of this session, we could probably rope it into the discussion on the last one, and we'll give everybody a chance to address this topic as well. So the last bit is, I think we can all agree that there's not enough consideration of BIPOC and non-white perspectives in archaeology today. What are the responsibilities of Arizona's archaeologists to include more non-white perspectives? And importantly, why does this matter? So let's go ahead and open this up. Rebecca, do you want to start off?
Hi, yes. Yeah, sorry, I'm just rereading your question too. Yeah, I mean, I think the responsibilities are to be able to have a more nuanced idea of the relationships of the people who live here and the people who you know, even extend beyond Arizona, right? Because Arizona is just an arbitrary sort of boundary. And so, you know, we have relations in Mexico, we have relations in what is known as New Mexico, as, you know, in all of these areas. And so by having more diverse voices as part of the narrative, there's a much better opportunity to understand the dynamics of the past and of today, and to really understand why there is so much inequity, why there is a lack of diversity. You know, I think it's also really important to be able to use archaeology to get at ways that impact communities, rather than kind of doing this work in sort of a bubble. This work, and the reason that I do it is because it's really important to not only be part of the story of here, but in working with so many students of color, to see, you know, sort of a loss of hope that they have when they talk about going to college, much less even getting into something like archaeology. That's, you know, that's another conversation, as Bill mentioned earlier. You know, like the whole idea is to just simply work with students and get them to a place where, if they want to be in college, like to get them to graduate, whether or not they're doing archaeology. And so I think part of, the responsibilities of having that diversity, or the responsibility of archaeologists should, you know, there should be that responsibility to really work from a place of recognizing that we are not equal, and we get there. And so I want people to recognize that I mean, we need a hand. we need to be able to be part of the story too. So yeah, that in a nutshell.
Thanks, Rebecca. Margaret, since you're unmuted, you want to go ahead next?
Yeah, I was going to make it short and sweet. I'm going to tell you right out, representation matters. The fact that there are 2 Black people on this panel, Bill and I are probably 2 of the few Black archaeologists who actually work out here in the West. And I don't know how many Black archaeologists you know, Bill, more than I do, that's for sure. But I mean, I'm the only one, to my knowledge, in the Forest Service. And I know, I know Bill and actively, and I actively get myself out there because it's really important for us to be out front, to be just be represented and to show other Black people that this field is open for us and that there actually is a place for people of color, and particularly Black people, in this field. And I didn't have anybody to look up to. I had nobody to look up to. And I suspect Bill was a similar situation. And if I was, you know, there are a lot of reasons why I was able to survive in this field, but you know we have to reach behind us and be out there and be willing to bring people in behind us. But it's a hard road. So representation really, really matters.
Thank you, Margaret. Annie, would you like to jump in? So here, you know, we're talking about Arizona archaeologists, including more non-white perspectives. What are your thoughts here? And why is it important?
Yeah, so, I mean, most people who know me and have been conversing with me before this panel know that I'm pretty adamant in stating that I'm part of the problem. We white archaeologists are part of the problem, not intentionally. And that goes back to, you know, understanding and recognizing our implicit biases. I've been reading a lot of books and, you know, just understanding the unconscious decisions that we make. And, you know, part of my white privilege is the choice on whether or not to engage in this discussion. And as a white person, that is a choice that's not afforded to anyone else but me as a white person. And so I feel like part of the responsibility of being a white archaeologist, and it goes in kind of in the larger discussion of Black Lives Matter and all this beyond archaeology, is just we have a responsibility we need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Like everyone on this panel knows how nervous I was, and I am, and I still am. And, you know, but it's hard because as a white archaeologist, like, I don't know what my role is. I don't want to make it about me helping. I don't want to make it about me. Oh, look at what the great things I'm doing for the Black Lives Matter movement or anything like that. And I don't know what that looks like for somebody like me. I don't, you know, I hesitate to say like, I want to help, because it's like, you don't need my help. You might need, you know, white archaeologists or white people in general to step out of the way, but we might not know how. So it's essentially like being challenged to show up to the discussion knowing that you don't have control of the outcome. And that's hard for a lot of people. And it's all about being vulnerable and recognizing that I have perpetuated a colonial narrative by being a white archaeologist for 16 years in Arizona. And I'll be the first to admit to all 70 people, is like, I don't know how to reconcile that or how to move forward. I don't have any answers right now. All I know is that we've got to be part of the discussion, and we've got to be willing to be wrong. We need to be willing to sound stupid or sound like, no, Annie, you're not getting it. Like, you know, we need to be willing to just take a back seat somehow. So that's kind of the way I feel about that.
Thank you, Annie. And I know this is a hard place to be, and a hard to be the only white person on a panel talking. So thank you so much for your vulnerability and being here today. Who would like to go next? How about April? Would you like to chime in next?
Yeah, I can make this really quick because I think there's only one thing that people haven't covered from my point of view, and that's while archaeology is the study of, you know, the past and the artifacts that are coming from the work, I I think some of the responsibility has to be that you need to understand that it's not just a past, that this past is attached to living people, and they need to be a part of the interpretation of what's going to be going on. So, and in order for that to happen, you're going to need to hire those people to help you interpret that history, because so far it's been so one-sided. And I think that's where a lot of the tribes are so frustrated with, is that we've just been thought of as, you know, an afterthought. And it's like, okay, well, let's just get them in the consultation period. It's like, well, for myself, it wasn't just need to start at the consultation period. It needed to start in the field. It needed to be at the survey level, and then the, you know, data recovery, testing. It needed to be a part of the entire process, not just at the end when the information was completed and put into a nice little report and put out, you know. And then also, you know, as being an agency person, reading that material and calling out people for the type of language that they're putting into these reports that maybe necessarily are probably, you know, and I found a couple that were offensive to me, but, you know, that wouldn't happen if I wasn't there. So you need to also have people in the positions that I have now finally been able to get to make those changes. We need to be everywhere, not just, you know, as tokens put in to make, you know, your proposal or, you know, whatever it is that you're going to do look good.
Some great points, April. Thank you so much. Bill, I'm going to ask if you could go and just say a few things real quickly, because I want to save the last words for Jewel, if I could. I have a funny feeling she's got something good for us.
All right. Well, I don't want to go after that then. I'll keep it real short. You know, this whole entire thing begins and ends with mindfulness. Being mindful of what you are doing, what you are thinking, and why you think that, and why you're doing that stuff. That's really where it all begins and ends, with being an anti-racism advocate. But don't let that introspection and what, you know, investigation of your thoughts and minds and everything keep you from acting, because we don't really need more allies. We need accomplices who are willing to stand there when the battle's not going the way that we all think it should. Let it all go down, and, you know, you're there with these folks till the end. I mean, we've had allies for a long time. That's how we got to where we're at. Now we need accomplices and people who are going to help us break the rules, because the dirty little secret is we're making this up as we go. Those rules that we're using for these sites and how we do archaeology, they were never meant to stay the same way forever. We can change those things. We can listen to others, and we can actually change the kind of stuff that we're doing. So don't think that you're trapped. Start by being mindful of what's going on and why we are in these conditions we're in, and then act. Go ahead, break the rules, because they're meant to be changed.
Thank you so much, Dr. White. Jewel, please, if you would chime in now.
I think no diversity means that the narrative is really controlled by the dominant society, and they decide what is important and how it is discussed and commemorated. I think it's only ethical to move in the direction of telling the whole truth. And to not move in that direction is to intentionally stifle growth and to continue to suppress the contributions of people of color throughout history, and to detract from the overall richness of our collective history. So by including other voices, you're actually inserting them into the history books and into regional and national public memory. Also, as far as Native American cultures, these cultures prior to 1492 developed independently of European influence, of old world influence. So in that sense, there is unique knowledge here. There are unique ideas here. We can learn a lot from Native people if we start listening to them and turning that knowledge into something people nowadays can use to protect and prolong life. We can, for example, learn how to survive if there are massive floods, how to do controlled burns in national forests and in forests in general, how to use herbs to cure ailments and diseases such as cancer. I think, I began my career at an opportune time when a lot of laws and mandates were already present when I was in college. So the Antiquities Act, the National Historic Preservation Act, ERFA, NAGPRA, ARPA, those laws were already in the books, and they laid the foundation for archaeology to change for the better and to continue to move toward a more ethical treatment of people. I think they help change the type of archaeological research that preceded me, which oftentimes failed to see the humanity of the people being studied. And since I've been a part of archaeology, I've seen vast improvements as the next generation of archaeologists come into positions of leadership and decision-making. The inclusion of diverse perspectives, in my mind, equates to the maturing of archaeology. And it's awesome to hear the voices of Native archaeologists. It's awesome to hear the voices of African Americans and Latinos, and it's awesome to have a voice. I'm very hopeful that with our participation, we will start perhaps to go back to the information we already have in museums and archives and improve our overall knowledge. It's really time to analyze the data we have and to create a more inclusive understanding of prehistory and history in general.
Jewel, I love the hopeful vision that you have, that the profession is changing as you see it, and that we're going in a good direction. So thank you so much. Folks, we're just about out of time, so I'm going to ask Heather to jump in and share her screen one more time. We're going to go, and if you folks at home or in the office could go ahead back into the Menti app and start filling out the form. We're curious to see how things have changed from the beginning of the session to the end. So there it is on your screen. Heather's got the number up there, and we can see the responses now versus the responses from the beginning of the session. So go ahead, and we'll give you a moment to go through all these. We're just repeating a few of the questions here. Okay, so it looks like we're getting a little bit more of a percentage thinking that it's more diverse than previously, although we don't quite have the same number of respondents, but the trend is about the same. So let's go ahead and move on to the next question, Heather. All right, do you feel that archaeology benefits marginalized or underrepresented communities? So previously, most people thought, no, it doesn't benefit, but there were some people who thought yes. So curious to see how the trend might be the same or might have changed here. And I promise you, I'll be releasing you all here soon. So it looks like it's a little more even. There's still folks thinking that there's not as much representation, and but it certainly looks like a more positive outlook the second time around here. All right, Heather, let's move on to the next question then. And do you think Arizona Archaeology is objective and unbiased? The first time around, overwhelmingly, people thought no, with a few yeses. And so let's see how we've moved the needle here on this question. Well, so it's looking like nearly even more overwhelmingly than last time, people feel that Arizona Archaeology is not objective and unbiased, and that we have a long way to go. So thank you everyone for bearing with the extra questions. Really appreciate it. We got one more Mentimeter exercise here for you, and what it'll allow you to just go ahead and put in a word. Go ahead and type in the word. If you've got one word that represents your takeaway from the discussion today, go ahead and put it in there. If you've got more than one word, it'll let you put it in a few times. So go ahead and do that, and just be real curious to see what people are taking away at this point. While you go ahead and do that, I'm going to say that we are out of time. This was a very good discussion, and I'm very thankful to have had this opportunity. Very thankful to my partners in crime here, Rebecca, April, Annie, Jewel, Margaret, and Bill, for this discussion. It was really important, and I hope a lot of people got something out of this. It seems like a lot of people have gotten the idea of accomplices out of this, and I think this is a really great thing going forward. So on behalf of all of us, thank you so much for attending today. I'll turn control back to Catherine if she would like it for the last minute to close out the session, but that's all you'll hear from me. So thank you very much.
Oh, sorry. I'm all muted here. Can you all hear me? Got a little emotional looking at that word cloud. I want to challenge all of you. I had something to say, but what I wound up writing down was something Dr. White said here on a Post-it. It's all backwards for you all, but we don't need allies. We need accomplices. And that's going to live on my computer screen, this Post-it. And I challenge all of you on the call that if you receive benefit from this conversation, I challenge you all to put that as a Post-it on your screen as well. And I commit to this. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so privileged to be able to host it and to have all of you here. Thank you, panelists, for taking the time and being so vulnerable and sharing your stories. I've jotted down several of your thoughts on directions we should be taking and that I should be taking in a leadership role. And I promise to act as an accomplice to get our radical agenda of equity where it needs to be. And with that, again, I'm just going to put a shameless plug in for continued, find us on Facebook, find us on the web so that you can stay tuned for more webinars, more great engaging discussions. And I really look forward to seeing some of you at least face-to-face at our conference this June. Stay safe, stay well, and let's make some changes, folks. All right, take care, everyone.